Hey everyone, we're going to jump right back into painting some clouds. I took this amazing photograph of a cloud formation of storm clouds near my house in Virginia, and then in the background there were brightly sunlit clouds, and it was almost sunset time, but I thought the contrast was really cool. I didn't want to paint the houses across the street because I didn't like them, so I looked up a red barn and then a red farmhouse and decided to go with that. So you'll see I began sketching just the basic zones of the features of these clouds and where I wanted the roof. I'm not putting any details in at this point. I'm drawing fairly lightly. I'm using a 2HB pencil from Ticonderoga, but I'm just figuring out proportions and perspective and things like that. I'm going to augment the tree line in the background, and eventually what you're going to see is I'm going to hit some different saturation points while practicing this, and I'm going to turn these into much darker storm clouds. I'm going to make this much more ominous, but I think this painting was pretty successful, definitely more successful than my Horus painting that I did 2 days ago. But the point here is to keep practicing. If you can see from the Horus painting to this how much has improved, you can do that as well. So I'm going to keep going. We're obviously using the Arteza 36 solid pans, and I'm just going to go forward with that. I'm sorry that I have to apologize that I didn't put the colors in front of the camera. I realize that's fairly important when you're doing this so people can see what you're mixing. But I just want to tell you that right off the bat, I put a wash over this paper in a light yellow, almost the lightest color of the clouds in the background that you saw in the photograph. And with that, I left a little border with the tape so that there would be a bright white border. But tinting the paper in yellow changed the mood of this painting. And although in the original photo most of the tones were cold, except for the orange yellow background, painting this piece yellow made it seem more like a storm was brewing. I'm not exactly sure what that is, because to me, I thought painting a base color of the light yellow would give somewhat of a sun-drenched sunset effect to some of the tones. However, it really made it seem quite sinister as I started to lay down some of the gray tones. So as you can see, I'm going in with a Q-tip and just removing some of the colors and just painting really basic general shapes and general color tones that I want to use. These are all pretty much the lightest colors of those regions. And I'm leaving the house blank at this point because I haven't decided what I want to do for the roofing material, nor what I want to do for the cladding on the side of the building. So now I'm going to generally apply these darker gray and blue tones to where I want to darken up the clouds. But as you can see, I'm painting way over the regions that I want to, and then I'm going in with a paper towel and lightly dabbing the color away. And you can use your finger to kind of add the cloud textures there. It definitely worked on some. What you'll see with the top is there's an issue there because I painted down the dark grays on dry paper. So the background, which you saw, was already dry. So it was a lot harder to pick up that paint with the paper towel. You can avoid this by lightly putting down a little bit of water, which you will see I will do later with the deeper and deeper tones. So now we're getting into the really deep tones of the clouds. And these are mostly the undersides of the clouds from the photograph, but sometimes it's actually just the top, or it's just closer to the viewer because the sun is much further away and covered by clouds. So you have to kind of pick and choose what you need to do as far as color blocking and how you will be diffusing those colors with your paper towel or your Q-tip. The paper towel works a lot better for me. The Q-tip is smaller and more precise. However, it dirties up very quickly and you have to keep using new ones, which is quite wasteful. But here you can see I'm adding the warm orange and yellow. That is a cloud in the background. I'm gonna have issues that you'll see further along with really delineating that cloud from the rest of them. It almost seems as if the sun is gigantic and behind a break in the clouds. So you'll see as I try to layer in other contours and darker tones and cleaning up the lines a little bit, how I try to push that yellow further back, but it ends up being quite difficult for me to do that. Looking back now in this bottom left corner, there were 3 specific breaks in the clouds in which the blue light of the sky came through. I'm already at the point of over-processing this painting too much where I cannot pull back the light blue shades of the sky that were in the original photograph. So I'm going with this storm idea fully fleshed out. I just have not figured out what to do with the bottom left corner at this point, but you'll see it ends up pulling out pretty well by the end. If you'll remember from the Horus video, I forgot to move the foliage as if there was wind blowing, and it didn't make sense with the huge storm in the depiction. So this time, I think I caught it kind of towards the end, but soon enough to where I could augment it, I started twisting the trees and the foliage in the background off to the right side to show that there was some movement going on. You'll see this much clearer as I deepen up the tones around that. But here what you see I'm doing with the dark gray is I'm really giving the cloud in front of it a contour. And that's when I started to see these clouds come to life, was even on the right side. You can see some very, very strong cloud shapes. And they don't look normal. They look kind of angry and vicious. It reminds me of some of those old illuminated Japanese paintings, but I think it's stylized yet still somewhat realistic, so that you still really understand that it's, a well-painted cloud and not just blobs. You will see I do have a couple issues with tones. There are a lot of color tones of the gray and the blue, and sometimes that just kind of muddies up a little bit. Here I'm busting out more of the contours in front of that orange cloud. I'm really trying to delineate that orange cloud way off in the distance, because I want the viewer to see that as it's obviously brightly lit by the sun, but it's so far away that it was hard for me to get even little details in it to make it seem like it was smaller. I was having a hard time really pushing that cloud into the background. So now I'm just going ahead and darkening up the clouds around the foliage so I can get some good height on the foliage and good definition of the treetops and such, but also giving them that movement to the right hand side, which you kind of see. So this area that I'm painting blue right now was a big mistake. And this is when I just decided I'm not going to be able to bring back that daylight in these clouds. I'm gonna have to go with this dark sky. Well, the thing about that is that this dark sky that I'm painting in the breaks of the cloud they don't make sense in the depiction. And although they're pretty, and I love the color blue, they don't belong in this setup, especially not with that bright yellow cloud in the background. So it's something to consider when you're painting these things. When you are making artistic choices, they do sometimes, need to make sense. I had gone some time without looking at the reference photo again, but any breaks in the clouds in that photo had a bright light blue behind them because the sky was bright. The only thing bringing darkness to the photograph was the storm clouds. And I'm not even sure if they were actually storm clouds in my photograph. It did storm that day, but these didn't look that hostile. But the ones that I've painted do. I think it would lend to a lot better contrast in the image if I had left the wash off of some areas and when those breaks in the clouds gone with a really, really watered down light blue, like super, super light, so that you really got this idea of this contrast of these ominous clouds rolling in pretty fast, and that the day wasn't over. I think that would have been a much better contrast. But I still think this image worked out and tells a really great story. So I think at this point I'm gonna finish these details and then let this layer dry. Once it's dry, I'm gonna come back and start working on the farmhouse. After doing some research and double checking my perspective, I realized my window was way off. It was way too wide. It wasn't centered. And so I had to squeeze it down and make sure it looked better. So you see me doing that. I'm eyeballing all of this. I'm not using really a reference. There was a window I liked in one of the farmhouse photos, but I didn't want to knock off any of the farmhouses that I found on Google Images because they were way too complicated. I had sought a farmhouse because I thought it would be simple, kind of A-frame or saltbox style, but they were they were almost Victorian in the image results. So I wanted to go with red. I wanted high contrast in the cladding, and then I decided to go with the darkest brown color next to the black in the Arteza set for the roofing, and I'll water that down and then deepen it up in the coming layers. So a mistake that I made here is obviously painting wet on wet. The brown shutters, which was just going to be a base color for the shutters on the window, bled into the red, so I'm, fixing that as I go. After that whole section has dried, I came back and decided I wanted to work on the panes of glass in the window and then add in some more details into the painting. I'm not going to add any texture to the roof. I really didn't want the roof to be a standout in this picture, and because it cropped so high into the orange cloud in the background, you had that really strong contrast back there. I wanted the roof to almost activate similarly to the dark clouds directly behind it. I used the same brown from the roof to shade in the singular pieces of cladding and around the window. I recommend doing that when you're using neutrals. It really draws the building together better. And then I used a watered down version of the brown to kind of shade in architectural areas. One thing I know from architectural painting, which is what I'm very experienced in, is you really have to remember where the sun is shining from. And it was obvious with the clouds and obviously in my photograph that the sun was way off into the right field of the image, which was to the west as it was setting. So I knew that my lines would have to be fairly strong, but could still be watered down a little bit. So now I'm removing the tape, and I'm actually really proud of this now that it's dry. One thing I did off camera is I came back in and I painted 3 birds on the roof. But as you can see, some of these lines are really great. Most of the pencil lines are gone. I'm not really worried about those. But I think from the last painting with Horace, these clouds have way improved. And it was just from doing a little more research on, other techniques to get this done. This painting made me really excited to, head back into a week of working again on watercolors. But thank you guys for stopping by, and I hope you learned a little something with me on this, as this is my second journey into doing clouds, and I hope you come back really soon. Thanks again.